Hello everybody! Today we're taking a look at Final Destination Bloodlines. This was directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein and stars Caitlin Santawana and Teo Briones. Way back in 1968, a young woman named Iris Campbell and her fiancé Paul attended the grand opening of the Skyview restaurant, a Space Needle-like structure. During the party, Iris somehow has a premonition of the tower collapsing and warns everybody to get the hell out before they all die horrible, gruesome deaths. As we know from previous Final Destination movies, Death does not like it when you mess with his plans. But it also takes Death a bit of time to catch up to everyone who was not supposed to survive. And since so many people were in that tower, many of them managed to have children, and their children had children before Death finally came for them. But Death is a persistent motherfucker, and he has slowly been catching up on his kill list and finally has reached the Campbell-Reyes family. And young Stephanie Reyes, played by Caitlin Santawana, has to figure out how to save her family before Death finally comes for them. I suppose I should begin by talking about my history with the Final Destination franchise, and this will not take long. I've only seen the first one. I'm not sure why I only saw the first one. I didn't see it in theaters. I think I rented it after the fact, and I remember liking it, but I guess I just didn't like it enough to bother looking into the movies that came after. And I probably would have done the same for Bloodlines, but I decided to give it a watch because I heard it was doing very well critically, which is unusual for a Final Destination movie. They tend to get mixed reviews at best. And now I understand why this was so highly thought of. This was way better than I expected. Of course, given that this is a Final Destination movie, there are plenty of what I would call comically violent deaths. The movie begins with everyone dying in the collapse of the not Space Needle, and they mostly died because it seems whoever built this tower cut every corner in the book and then wrote their own bonus chapter in the book just so they would have more corners to cut. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why you never hire the lowest bidder. Ever. And even with all the crazy shit that happens during that opening sequence, they still manage to come up with more and more insane deaths as the movie goes on. It's basically a sequence of very deadly Rube Goldberg machines, and they get very creative with the deaths and also with the fake-outs. There was one death that I thought was maybe a little too silly, but overall I liked what they did. But because all of this is so over the top, I'm not sure this really qualifies as horror, because horror implies scary, and this is just too silly to be scary. And I don't even think the filmmakers intend for this franchise to be scary at this point. It's just supposed to be fun. And if the only thing this movie had going for it were a lot of creative death scenes, I would probably say this was a wait-for-streaming situation. But underneath all of that violence and gore is an interesting story about a somewhat messed up family. They got 3 whole generations of trauma of varying degrees. After that premonition, Iris apparently became so obsessed with keeping her family alive that she went to ridiculous lengths to protect them and keep them isolated from the outside world, to the point where they actually got taken away and put in foster care. And in the present day, she's living in some sort of Mad Max fortress and is completely cut off from the outside world and just living a miserable existence. There's probably a message in there. By isolating herself from all the dangers of the world, she is alive, but is she really living? And at what point is all this risk avoidance no longer worth it? How much did you miss out on purely because of fear? It's good to be afraid of some stuff, that's just common sense, but you gotta draw the line somewhere. And then we get to her daughter Darlene, who initially thought her mother was crazy, but eventually came around and realized she was right. Unfortunately, this led to her becoming almost as obsessive as Iris. And once she realized she was going down that path, she basically just cut off all contact with her husband and her kids. And she thought by doing so she was helping them, but it's possible she did more harm than good. Again, probably a lesson there. And then we get to Stephanie, and Caitlin Santawana is very good in this. She is also kind of isolated from her family because she's dealing with her own shit in college and also has these recurring nightmares that seem to be related to the premonitions Iris had way back when. And she never really processed her mother walking out on the family, so she is dealing with a whole lot of shit and the cycle of trauma continues. And when she realizes death is coming for her family and she tries to protect them, their reaction is basically, "Oh, now you care?" There's a lot going on here, and it's not at all what I would have expected from a Final Destination movie. They did a very good job with the story. And as you may be aware if you've seen the other movies in the franchise, the late Tony Todd had a recurring character, and he got to play that character one last time before his death. I only vaguely remember the character from the first movie, but I thought it was a lovely send-off. Overall, it was a very fun, very violent movie that had a surprising amount of depth, and I enjoyed it very much. If extremely violent deaths are not your thing, then you definitely should avoid this because the movie earns its R rating. But if that kind of thing is your bag, baby, I highly recommend checking it out. And that's all I have to say about Final Destination Bloodlines. Till next time, take care.